At my sister's college graduation, my parents grabbed the microphone and announced to a crowd of 300 people that they should have stopped after their first kid because their second child was completely useless. Laughter echoed through the grand banquet hall, burning my cheeks with humiliation. When I confronted them afterward with tears in my eyes, they simply rolled their eyes and called me too sensitive. I walked out of that venue and promised myself I would never look back. 7 years later, my phone lit up with a text message from my mother. It was the very first time she had reached out since that day. The message simply read, "Come home immediately, your sister has an emergency." I had no idea that walking back into that house would give me the perfect opportunity to dismantle their entire lives in one single evening. I am Kelsey, 33 years old, and today I watched my family's facade crumble to dust. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who underestimated your worth. I pulled my car into the sweeping circular driveway of my parents' upscale suburban home in Connecticut. The perfectly manicured lawns and towering oak trees projected an image of flawless wealth, the exact image they cared about more than their own daughter. My heart hammered against my ribs as I walked up the bluestone steps. I had spent the entire 2-hour drive wondering what kind of terrible tragedy had befallen my older sister Melanie. Despite 7 years of absolute silence, the word emergency had triggered a foolish, lingering sense of familial duty deep inside my chest. I barely had time to turn the handle on the heavy mahogany front door before it was thrown open from the inside. There were no warm greetings. There were no hugs or tears of relief. There was no asking how my drive was. Instead, my mother Catherine stood in the marble foyer with a rigid posture, wearing her usual designer pearls and a familiar scowl. Before I could even take off my coat, she shoved a thick stack of heavy legal documents directly into my chest. "Read these and sign on the yellow line," she commanded, her voice echoing coldly off the vaulted ceiling. I stumbled back a step, instinctively catching the heavy leather binder before it hit the floor. "What is this, Mom?" I asked, glancing down at the intricate financial jargon printed on the top page. "It is a guarantor agreement for Donovan's new business loan," she said, crossing her arms impatiently. "Your sister Melanie and her husband need $500,000 to secure their next big venture. Since you dropped out of college and do not have any student debt dragging you down, your credit score is the only useful thing you actually possess." I stared at her, the sheer audacity of her demand momentarily stealing my breath. I looked down at the documents in my hands. The paperwork was for a high-yield commercial loan. If Donovan defaulted, I would be legally on the hook for $500,000. They were essentially asking me to hand over my entire financial future to a man I had never even met, for a sister who had spent her entire life stepping on my neck to get ahead. "You texted me about a family emergency to trick me into co-signing a massive loan for Melanie's husband," I asked, keeping my voice dangerously level. Catherine rolled her eyes with dramatic exasperation. "Do not start with your dramatics, Kelsey. You owe us this much. Sign it to pay us back for the absolute embarrassment you caused this family at Melanie's graduation. Walking out like a petulant child just because we made a harmless joke about your lack of ambition. You ruined her special day. Now fix your mistakes and put your signature on that paper." Her words brought the bitter taste of the past right back into my mouth. My parents had always sacrificed my well-being to fund Melanie's lifestyle. I remembered the nights I spent crying in my dorm room when they abruptly stopped paying my tuition, forcing me to drop out just so they could afford a lavish destination wedding for Melanie. They had labeled me a failure for leaving school, completely omitting the fact that they were the exact reason I had to leave in the first place. I calmly closed the leather binder and handed it right back to Catherine. "I am not signing anything, Mom," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "I have not spoken to you in 7 years. You cannot summon me like a disobedient servant and demand I risk my entire livelihood for a brother-in-law I do not even know." Catherine's face flushed a deep, angry red. Her manicured nails dug into the leather binder. "How dare you speak to me with such disrespect?" she hissed, stepping closer. "You are nothing but a dropout working some dead-end desk job. You should be honored that we are even allowing you to contribute to the family legacy." Melanie is a highly successful lifestyle influencer, and Donovan is a brilliant venture capitalist. He is building a real estate technology empire. He is a visionary. You are just a stepping stone. Before I could respond to her ridiculous tirade, the heavy front door suddenly swung wide open, bringing a gust of crisp autumn air into the tense foyer. Donovan strode into the house, talking loudly on his cell phone. My African-American brother-in-law looked exactly like the flashy finance bro my mother had just described. He was wearing a custom-tailored suit that easily cost $5,000, a massive gold watch, gleaming on his wrist, and carrying an air of completely unearned arrogance. He ended his phone call and finally noticed me standing in the hallway. He looked me up and down, taking in my simple, unbranded clothing with a look of pure amusement. He did not offer a handshake or a greeting. Instead, he reached into his designer pocket, pulled out a crumpled $100 bill, and casually let it drop to the hardwood floor right at my feet. He adjusted his silk tie and let out a booming, condescending laugh. "Hey, dropout," he said, flashing a blindingly white smile. "Run down to Starbucks and get my wife an iced caramel macchiato. Make yourself useful for once. The real earners in this house need to talk business." I stared at the crumpled $100 bill lying on the imported Turkish rug. I did not bend down to retrieve it. I did not flinch or shrink back like the frightened girl they all remembered. Instead, I stepped squarely over the money, the heel of my sensible black pump, leaving a faint indentation on the face of Benjamin Franklin. Donovan scoffed, shaking his head as if I were a stubborn toddler, and strutted past me into the formal dining room. I followed him, the heavy silence of the house broken only by the clanking of his expensive leather shoes and the ticking of the grand-grandfather clock in the hallway. Sitting at the head of the massive mahogany dining table was my sister Melanie. She looked exactly as she did on her highly curated social media feeds, draped in a cream silk blouse and wearing diamond stud earrings that easily cost a full month of my supposed salary. Her phone was propped up on a sleek ring light stand, capturing her perfect angles, completely ignoring the fact that I had just walked into the room for the first time in 7 long years. She tapped her screen, ended her live video recording, and finally lifted her gaze. Her eyes immediately scanned me from head to toe, taking in my plain charcoal suit. Her perfectly contoured lips curled into a sneer of pure, unfiltered pity. "Still shopping at discount racks, I see," Melanie said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "You know, Kelsey, if you had just swallowed your stubborn pride and taken that receptionist job Donovan offered you last year, you might be able to afford a blazer that actually fits. Or at least one that does not look like it was rescued from a local donation bin. Look at you. You are 33 years old, and you still dress like a temporary office worker trying to blend into the wallpaper." I took a seat at the opposite end of the table, folding my hands neatly in my lap. Donovan had not offered me a receptionist job. He had offered me a data entry position at minimum wage specifically so he could brag to his high society friends about employing his charity case sister. I did not bother correcting her. I simply let her insults hang in the air, refusing to give her the emotional reaction she was so desperately craving. Before Melanie could launch into another critique of my appearance, heavy footsteps echoed from the hallway. My father William marched into the dining room carrying a heavy crystal decanter of dark scotch. He did not say hello. He did not ask how I had been or where I had lived for the past 7 years. He slammed his glass down on the table and pointed a rigid, accusatory finger directly at my face. "Your mother gave you the paperwork." He barked, his face already flushing with a deep, angry red. "I expect those guarantor forms signed before you leave this house tonight, but since you are insisting on being difficult and ungrateful, we are moving to Plan B." He poured himself a generous drink, pointedly not offering one to me. "Donovan and Melanie have a temporary cash flow issue. It is a minor technicality with their offshore accounts. Absolutely nothing to worry about. But the bank is requiring a bridge of $200,000 by Friday morning." I maintained my steady gaze, my training as a forensic auditor automatically kicking in. I watched the way Donovan shifted uncomfortably in his seat while my father spoke. I noticed the subtle tightening of his jaw and the slight sheen of sweat on his forehead. These were the classic, undeniable tells of a man drowning in financial panic. And what exactly does that have to do with me? I asked. William slammed his heavy hand onto the mahogany wood, making the crystal glasses rattle violently. It has everything to do with you. You have a retail 401k from whatever mediocre accounting firm you do data entry for. We ran the numbers based on your old tax returns. If you liquidate it and take the early withdrawal penalty, you can cover a quarter of what they need. We will put up the rest. You are going to cash it out tomorrow morning. I looked around the table. My mother, Catherine, was standing in the doorway, nodding in stern agreement. My father was glaring at me with absolute authority. My sister was checking her pristine manicure, looking completely bored by a conversation about seizing my entire life savings. They were entirely serious. They genuinely believed they could snap their fingers and claim everything I had worked for. You want me to empty my entire retirement account to pay for a temporary cash flow issue for a sister who has not spoken to me in 7 years? I asked, keeping my voice dangerously calm. Catherine stepped forward from the doorway, her eyes flashing with indignation. "Do not act like you are the victim here," she snapped. "We are giving you a chance to finally be a productive member of this family." William scoffed, taking a long, aggressive sip of his scotch. "Listen to your mother, Kelsey. We emptied your college fund to pay for Melanie's dream wedding. Family sacrifices for the exceptional ones. Do your part and stop being so incredibly selfish." The sheer cruelty of his justification hit me like a physical blow. They had not emptied my college fund because I was failing. I was on the dean's list. They emptied it because Donovan insisted on a lavish destination wedding in Lake Como to impress his wealthy venture capitalist friends. And my parents were so desperate to secure their place in high society that they willingly sacrificed my entire future to pay for it. I remembered the freezing nights I spent sleeping in my rusted car because I could not make rent after being kicked out of the campus dorms. I remembered the endless double shifts waiting tables just to buy used textbooks. And now they wanted me to sacrifice myself for their golden child all over again. Melanie sighed loudly, tossing her perfectly styled hair over her shoulder. "Just do it, Kelsey. Donovan's tech company is about to go public. We will pay you back with interest next year. Consider it an investment. It is the best financial decision you will ever make in your otherwise unremarkable life. Plus, it is the least you can do after ruining my graduation with your childish crying. You owe me this." I looked at Melanie, then at William, and finally at Donovan. Donovan was leaning back in his chair, swirling his drink, looking like a man who had already won the negotiation. He gave me a condescending, arrogant wink. I did not yell. I did not cry. I reached forward and calmly picked up my crystal water glass. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the silence stretch out until the tension in the room became almost suffocating. I set the glass back down precisely on the coaster. "A cash flow issue," I repeated, letting the words roll off my tongue with icy precision. "Donovan, didn't you just secure $5 million for the Pelican Bay condo project? Why does your wife need my retail 401k? Donovan's smug smile instantly vanished. Donovan stood completely frozen for a fraction of a second, his perfectly manicured hand tightening around the stem of his Scotch glass, until I thought the crystal might shatter. The silence in the dining room became absolute heavy with the sudden and unexpected shift in power. He glanced at Melanie, whose perfectly contoured face twisted in confusion, and then he looked back at me. His smug, untouchable smile had completely evaporated, replaced by a dark, calculating glare that revealed the true predator beneath the expensive suit. He slammed his glass down on the mahogany table and leaned aggressively across the expensive floral centerpiece, invading my personal space. The sharp scent of his overpowering designer cologne filled the air between us. "How do you know about the Pelican Bay project?" he demanded, dropping his smooth venture capitalist persona entirely. His voice was low-laced with a dangerous edge. "Have you been snooping through public real estate filings on your lunch breaks, trying to figure out how real money is made?" I sat back in my chair and crossed my legs, completely unbothered by his pathetic attempt at physical intimidation. "I do not need to snoop through public filings, Donovan. I just read the news. $5 million is a massive capital injection for a so-called tech startup. Yet here you are, shaking down a woman you think is a temporary data entry clerk for a $200,000 bridge loan. The math simply does not make sense. Melanie scoffed loudly from the head of the table, crossing her arms over her silk blouse. Oh, please, she sneered. Like you know the first thing about commercial real estate or venture capital. You could not even pass freshman biology. Donovan manages multi-million-dollar portfolios. You manage a spreadsheet. Donovan stepped around the table, puffing out his chest as he towered over me. You think you know how high-level finance works because you crunch numbers in a cubicle all day. You have absolutely no idea who you are dealing with. I have elite investment firms begging to throw cash at my feet. I play golf with men who own half of Manhattan. I know the executives at whatever sad little accounting firm you do data entry for. He pointed his finger directly at my face, jabbing the air inches from my nose. You are going to sign those guarantor papers right now. Because if you do not, I will make one phone call to my buddies on Wall Street, and you will be fired by tomorrow morning. You will be blacklisted from every financial firm in the entire state. My mother let out a sharp, approving breath. She marched over to stand right beside Donovan, forming a united front of pure, vicious intimidation. You need to listen to him, Kelsey. She snapped, her eyes narrowing with intense disdain. You have always been a massive liability to this family. You failed out of college so easily because you lack basic discipline. You have absolutely zero work ethic. Do not test a powerful man like Donovan. You already ruined your own education. Do you really want him to ruin your sad little career too? I looked at the woman who was supposed to be my mother. She was practically vibrating with anger, entirely willing to watch her son-in-law destroy my livelihood just to protect her own manufactured social standing. My father William remained seated, swirling his scotch, watching me with a look of cold expectation. He was fully endorsing this threat, waiting for me to break. You drop out of school, you disappear for 7 years, and now you come back into my house and disrespect the man who is single-handedly elevating our family name. Catherine continued, her voice rising to a shrill, hysterical pitch. Sign the papers right now. If you do not, Donovan will make that call. He will have you back on the street sleeping in your rusted-out car before midnight. And this time we will not even pretend to feel sorry for you. Donovan reached into the inside pocket of his custom suit and pulled out his sleek smartphone. He unlocked the screen and held it up, hovering his thumb over the keypad with an arrogant sneer. I am not playing games with you, dropout, he growled. Tell me the name of the firm. Tell me right now. I will call the managing partner and explain exactly why they need to terminate their lowest performing employee. I looked at the phone in his hand, then at the absolute conviction on my mother's face. They were so utterly convinced of my inferiority. They needed me to be a failure to justify their own horrible choices. They needed me to cower, to beg, to sign away my life, to maintain their illusion of superiority. I reached into my bag and pulled out my own phone. The screen was completely dark. I placed it flat on the table and pushed it slowly across the polished wood until it stopped right next to Donovan's empty Scotch glass. I did not break eye contact with him for a single second. Go ahead, Donovan, I said, my voice perfectly steady and clear. Call my CEO. Tell her you want me fired. Donovan let out a sharp bark of laughter, clearly thinking I was bluffing. Fine, he spat, tapping his screen aggressively. What is the name? Who am I calling to get you thrown out of the building? You are calling Kelsey, I replied calmly. Donovan froze. He frowned, his thick eyebrows pulling together in momentary confusion as he stared down at me. Before he could even open his mouth to process my words, the phone sitting on the table between us began to ring loudly, the bright screen illuminating the dark dining room and displaying a direct incoming call from the very Wall Street executive Donovan had just been bragging about knowing. The bright screen of my phone illuminated the dark mahogany wood between us. The caller ID flashed the exact name of the senior Wall Street executive Donovan had just sworn would blacklist me. The shrill ringtone cut through the suffocating silence of the dining room, echoing off the high vaulted ceilings. Donovan stared at the glowing screen. The color rapidly drained from his face, leaving his arrogant complexion a sickly pale gray. His jaw hung slightly slack. He looked from the phone to me, his brain completely short-circuiting as it tried to process a reality that completely shattered his manufactured universe. My father William was the first to break the tension. He let out a loud booming laugh that sounded forced and entirely devoid of genuine humor. He waved his hand dismissively, his heavy gold wedding band catching the light of the crystal chandelier. "Oh, very clever, Kelsey," William barked, taking a long drink of his scotch to steady his nerves. "You actually had us going for a second there. Changing your little friend's contact name in your phone to play a childish prank? Is this what you do at that dead-end job all day? Plan pathetic little practical jokes to seek attention from the real adults in the room. Turn off that ridiculous toy right now." Catherine immediately seized on my father's denial, her posture stiffening as she glared at me across the table. Her pearl necklace clinked against her collarbone as she crossed her arms tightly. "It is pathetic," Catherine sneered, her voice dripping with absolute disgust. "You are 33 years old and you are playing pretend. You do not own a company. You are a dropout. You could not even handle basic entry-level coursework. And now you expect us to believe you run a financial firm. Stop embarrassing yourself and sign the guarantor paperwork before your father loses his temper." I did not reach for my phone to silence the ringing. I let it ring until it went to voicemail, leaving the heavy silence to settle over the room once more. I slowly reached down and hoisted my leather briefcase from the floor. I placed it squarely on the center of the dining table, pushing aside a silver candlestick to make room. The metallic snap of the twin locks unfastening sounded like gunshots in the quiet room. "I do not play pretend, Mom," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "And I did not drop out because I could not handle the coursework. I dropped out because you and Dad stopped paying my tuition 2 weeks before final exams. You drained my entire education fund to pay for Melanie's floral arrangements and imported champagne. I was evicted from my dorm room on a Tuesday. I slept in the back seat of my Honda Civic through the freezing winter while you posted photos of yourselves drinking Bellinis on a yacht in Italy." Catherine opened her mouth to argue, but I did not give her the chance. I reached into the briefcase and pulled out a heavy framed document, sliding it across the table toward my father. "While you were telling your country club friends that I was a lost cause, I was working 3 back-to-back night shifts at a diner." I continued, my gaze locking onto William's widening eyes. "I paid for my own classes. I studied financial law until my eyes bled. I spent the last 7 years earning my CPA and my certified fraud examiner licenses. I built my firm from a folding table in a studio apartment into the most ruthless auditing agency on the East Coast." William stared at this gold-embossed seal on my certified fraud examiner license. He swallowed hard, his throat bobbing, but he stubbornly refused to accept defeat. "Anyone can print a certificate off the internet," he muttered, though his voice lacked its usual booming authority. "You are bluffing to get out of helping your sister." I reached back into my briefcase, my fingers wrapped around a thick, heavy dossier bound in dark leather. I pulled it out and slammed it onto the table with a deafening thud. The dossier was completely sealed, marked with severe, bold red lettering across the top margin. "I am not bluffing, Dad," I said, leaning forward and resting my forearms on the table. "My firm, Apex Financial Forensics, was not just hired by some random corporate client. We were just hired by the United States Securities and Exchange Commission as an independent third-party auditor. We track down stolen money. We hunt corporate parasites, and the SEC just handed me my biggest target yet." Melanie let out a high-pitched shriek of sheer, unadulterated fury. She could not stand it. She could not stomach the idea that the spotlight, the power, and the control were no longer fixated entirely on her. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. She practically lunged over her empty dinner plate, her manicured claws extended like a predatory bird. "You are a liar!" Melanie screamed, her voice echoing wildly. "This is all fake. You are just a jealous, pathetic loser trying to ruin my life because you have absolutely nothing going for you. Give me that garbage right now." She snatched the heavy leather dossier right out of my hands. I did not fight her for it. I let go instantly. Melanie gripped the folder and yanked it violently toward her chest, intending to rip the pages into shreds to prove her superiority. But she pulled it far too hard. The metal binding at the top of the folder snapped open. Dozens of high-resolution glossy photographs, highlighted bank wire transfers, and heavily redacted corporate ledgers exploded out of the folder. The papers rained down like confetti, scattering violently across the mahogany dining table, covering the expensive china and floating into the crystal glasses. The entire family froze. Nobody breathed. Every single document, every single photograph, and every single bank statement that now littered the dining table bore Donovan's smiling face. His startup company logo was printed at the top of every single incriminating page, and stamped diagonally across his face on every photo in bold, unforgiving red ink were the words, "Confidential Federal Audit." The glossy papers settled over the imported Turkish rug and the fine china like a crime scene. A suffocating silence slammed into the formal dining room, completely replacing the arrogant, hostile energy from just seconds before. The glaring red ink of the federal audit stamps practically vibrated against the dark mahogany table. Melanie stared down at a highlighted wire transfer receipt resting right next to her empty dinner plate. Her perfectly manicured finger hovered over the bold red letters, trembling slightly. "Donovan, what is this?" she asked. Her voice had completely lost its haughty influencer edge, replaced by a high, panicked whisper. Donovan swallowed so hard his Adam's apple bobbed aggressively against his tight silk tie. He let out a harsh, unnatural laugh and aggressively swiped the paper away from his wife. "It is fake, Mel. She fabricated it in her basement. I told you she was unstable. She is a data entry clerk trying to play detective because she is jealous of our success." I leaned forward, resting my hands flat on the table, my posture entirely relaxed. "Federal agents raided your Cayman Island holding accounts at exactly 6 o'clock this morning, Donovan. I signed the seizure authorization myself. Every single offshore asset you possess is currently frozen by the United States government." Donovan froze, his hands suspended in midair. The color drained from his face at a terrifying speed, leaving him looking sickly and hollow. "There is no proprietary real estate technology," I continued, my voice echoing clinically in the quiet room. "There never was an empire. You hired 2 freelance developers out of college to build a wireframe website, and you have been using it as a digital front for a massive textbook Ponzi scheme." Melanie stood up so fast her chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor. "Shut up!" she shrieked, clutching her cream silk blouse. "You are lying. You are just trying to ruin my life because you are a pathetic nobody. Donovan is a visionary. He manages multi-million-dollar portfolios. Let me break it down so your highly curated brain can process the reality of your situation, Melanie." I stood up to meet her furious gaze. "Your husband takes millions of dollars from new investors, promises them a high-yield return on a phantom software platform that literally does not exist, and uses that exact same cash to pay off the early investors to keep the illusion alive. He has been shuffling imaginary numbers for 3 years." I reached down and tapped a glossy photograph lying near the centerpiece. It showed Donovan shaking hands with an elderly man at a charity gala. "Every single luxury you flaunt online to your followers is stolen," I said, making sure my words carried across the entire room. "That pristine white G-Wagon parked in the circular driveway right now, bought entirely with money swindled from a municipal workers' pension fund in Ohio. Those diamond stud earrings you are wearing tonight, funded by a retired teacher's life savings. Even your lavish destination wedding in Lake Como, the exact wedding our parents forced me to drop out of college to pay for, was heavily subsidized by fraudulent corporate expenses," Donovan wrote off as a marketing event. "You are not building a legacy. You are living inside a financial crime scene." Catherine gasped loudly, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. She stepped toward the table, her eyes darting between the confidential documents and my face. "Kelsey, lower your voice right now," she commanded, though her usual authority was shaking. "If Donovan made a simple accounting error, we can handle this privately. We are a respectable family in this community. We do not air our dirty laundry to federal agencies. We will hire our own auditors and fix the paperwork quietly." "This is not a misfiled tax return, Mom," I said, looking at her with absolute pity. "This is wire fraud, interstate money laundering, and grand larceny. He has stolen nearly $40 million from innocent people. He did not ask for my retirement account tonight because he needed a bridge loan for a brilliant business venture. He begged for my money because the SEC demanded a surprise audit of his domestic accounts by Friday morning. He is short exactly $200,000 because he transferred that exact amount to Melanie yesterday to pay the mortgage on your Hamptons summer rental. He wanted me to take the fall and drain my savings to cover his tracks before the federal investigators noticed the missing capital. Donovan began sweating profusely. The confident, untouchable finance bro persona completely unraveled right in front of my eyes. He tugged frantically at his expensive silk tie, loosening it as if he suddenly could not breathe. He paced back and forth near the entryway, his expensive shoes slipping slightly on the polished floor. He let out another laugh, but this time it was a high, frantic, desperate sound. He looked like a cornered animal desperately searching for an exit that did not exist. He turned away from me, his eyes wide and wild, and looked directly at the head of the table. "She is crazy!" Donovan stammered, gesturing wildly toward me as he appealed to my father. "William, tell her. Tell her she is entirely out of her mind. We just secured that $2 million private bridge loan yesterday afternoon. The paperwork is already signed. The company is completely solvent. I swear to you, William, everything is fine." I slowly shifted my gaze to my father, waiting for his response. William sat up perfectly straight in his high-backed dining chair. He looked at the glossy federal documents scattered across the china, then at Donovan's sweating face. And finally he let out a loud, booming laugh. It was a forced, hollow sound, completely devoid of genuine humor. He adjusted his tailored suit jacket, puffing out his chest with an air of absolute, unshakable superiority. "She is absolutely crazy, Donovan!" William declared, his voice cutting through the suffocating tension of the room. He slammed his hand flat on the table, glaring at me as if I were a speck of dirt on his expensive Turkish rug. "You really thought you could come in here and pull a stunt like this? You think you can rattle us with some printed-out garbage you made in a copy shop? I know exactly about that $2 million bridge loan. I know all about it because I am the one who funded it." I processed his words, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. The depth of their financial ruin was far worse than my initial forensic analysis had calculated. "That is right," William continued, his chin raised in arrogant defiance. He was bragging, desperate to prove his financial genius to the room. I stepped up. When Donovan came to me with the prospectus for his pre-IPO expansion, I saw the vision. I saw the genius of his platform. I am the private investor who secured the future of this family's wealth. I leveraged my entire retirement portfolio. I took out a second mortgage on this house. I pulled out multiple high-yield equity loans to give my brilliant son-in-law the capital he needed to finalize the Pelican Bay acquisition. We are going to triple our investment by the end of the fiscal quarter. You know absolutely nothing about high-level wealth management, Kelsey. Catherine immediately stepped up, moving to stand directly behind William's chair. She placed a manicured hand on his shoulder, forming a united front of pure toxic delusion. She looked at me with absolute venom, her eyes flashing with indignant rage. "This is what real families do!" "Kelsey," Catherine yelled, her voice echoing sharply off the crystal chandeliers. "We build empires together. We support each other when it counts. We do not run away like cowards when things get slightly difficult. Your father made a brilliant strategic business decision to elevate our family legacy. We are securing generational wealth while you are sitting in a cubicle playing pretend auditor." Catherine stepped closer to the table, her face twisting into a mask of bitter resentment. "Not that you would ever understand loyalty. You abandoned us. You walked out on your sister's graduation because you were too selfish to share the spotlight for one single evening. You have no concept of family sacrifice. You never have. That is why you will always be a failure, and why Melanie will always be the success story of this household. We build each other up. You only know how to tear things down out of pure, unadulterated jealousy." Donovan, emboldened by my parents' blind, foolish loyalty, visibly relaxed. The color slowly returned to his pale face. He wiped the bead of sweat from his forehead with a silk pocket square and let out a breathless, arrogant chuckle. He stepped back up to the mahogany table, his chest puffed out once again as he hid behind William's financial backing. You hear that Kelsey Donovan sneered, his eyes flashing with desperate malice. Your own father knows you are a complete fraud. We are a unified front. The company is completely solvent. The capital is secured. You thought you could walk in here and divide us with some fake red stamps and photocopied bank statements. You are entirely out of your depth. Take your little briefcase and get the hell out of my house before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. I did not blink. I did not yell back. I did not match Catherine's hysterical volume or Donovan's aggressive posturing. I simply reached into the chaotic pile of documents scattered across the dining table. I bypassed the photos of the luxury cars and the forged corporate ledgers. I pulled out a specific packet bound with a thick silver paperclip and slid it directly across the smooth wood. The heavy packet glided across the table until it bumped gently against William's empty crystal tumbler. I tapped the cover page with my index finger. Dad, I said, my voice dropping to a low, quiet register that forced the entire room to fall dead silent just to hear me. Donovan did not put your $2 million into the business. William stared at the packet. His smug, superior expression faltered for the very first time. His eyes darted from the paper to my face, desperately searching for a crack in my composure, searching for any sign that this was just a vindictive prank. He found absolutely none. Open it, I commanded calmly. Look at page 4. William's hands trembled slightly as he picked up the heavy packet. He flipped past the first 3 pages of dummy corporate ledgers and fabricated profit margins. He landed squarely on page 4. It was a high-resolution, digitally certified printout of a direct international wire transfer confirmation. His eyes scanned the document, moving rapidly across the lines of stark black text, the offshore routing numbers, and the glaring red federal audit stamps authenticating the transaction. That $2 million never went to a tech expansion, I stated, watching the blood completely drain from my father's face as the reality of his total financial ruin set in. It never went to the Pelican Bay project. He wired every single cent of your retirement and your second mortgage directly to an offshore account in the Bahamas. William's breathing hitched. His chest heaved as he stared at the routing numbers. He dropped the paper back onto the mahogany table as if the pages had physically burned him. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He did not use it to build an empire. Dad? I finished, staring dead into his horrified eyes. He used it to pay off his massive underground sports betting debts. The heavy silence in the room stretched until it felt like the walls were caving in. William's eyes darted frantically across the stark black text of the wire transfer. The color completely drained from his face, leaving his skin an ashen, sickly white. His jaw worked silently as he read the offshore routing numbers, the Bahamas destination, and the glaring red federal audit stamps. The untouchable patriarch of the family, the man who had spent his entire life lecturing me about financial responsibility and the importance of legacy, physically crumpled before my eyes. William dropped the heavy packet onto the mahogany table as if it had burst into flames. He slowly turned his head toward Donovan. The arrogant finance bro was no longer puffing out his chest. Donovan was pressed against the antique credenza, his hands trembling as he stared at the floor, absolutely unable to meet my father's gaze. You lost it, William whispered, his voice cracking with a terrifying fragility. My retirement, the loans. You did not invest a single cent. You gambled away my entire life savings on sports bets. Donovan opened his mouth to speak, but only a pathetic, breathless stammer came out. I can get it back, William, Donovan choked out, holding up his shaking hands. I just need a little more time, a few good parlays, and I can cover the spread. I have a guy in Vegas who guarantees. William lunged forward, his chair crashing backward onto the floor. But before my father could wrap his hands around Donovan's throat, Catherine threw her body between them. My mother, entirely incapable of accepting that her manufactured reality had just imploded, instantly shifted into her default survival mode. If she could not deny the crime, she would simply force someone else to clean up the mess. And in this family, that someone was always me. Catherine spun around and lunged at me. She grabbed my forearm. her manicured nails digging painfully into my skin through the fabric of my blazer. Her eyes were wide and frantic, burning with aggressive, unhinged desperation. "You can fix this," Catherine demanded, shaking my arm violently. "You are a forensic auditor, Kelsey. You know exactly how these agencies work. You know how to move numbers around and make things disappear. Hide the transfer, reclassify the funds, create a shell company. I do not care what you have to do, but you are going to fix this right now." I stared down at her, hands gripping my arm, my expression entirely hollow. "You want me to commit federal perjury and aid in international money laundering to protect a man who just stole Dad's retirement?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. "He is family." Catherine shrieked, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "This is what you do for family. You protect us. And you have to protect him, Kelsey. You cannot do this to your sister. Melanie is pregnant." The words hung in the air like a desperate shield. Catherine gripped my arm even tighter, shaking me again. "You cannot send the father of her child to federal prison. You cannot ruin her life and leave my grandchild to grow up without a father. You have to alter the audit." Right on cue, Melanie initiated her performance. It was a masterclass in manipulation, a routine she had perfected over 3 decades. The haughty, furious influencer vanished instantly, replaced by a fragile, terrified victim. Melanie let out a loud theatrical sob and collapsed back into her dining chair. She immediately wrapped both arms protectively around her perfectly flat stomach, hunching her shoulders to look small and defenseless. Tears streamed beautifully down her cheeks, ruining her expensive mascara in a way that looked almost tragically cinematic. "Please, Kelsey." Melanie wept, her voice trembling with manufactured terror. "I am begging you. I did not know anything about the gambling. I just wanted to build a beautiful life for our baby. You cannot take my husband away from me. The stress is going to hurt the baby." I watched her rock back and forth, rubbing her belly with a protective, trembling hand. It was the exact same victim mentality she had weaponized throughout our entire childhood. It was the same routine she used when she crashed Dad's pristine Mercedes at 17, crying hysterically and claiming I had distracted her from the passenger seat so she would not lose her driving privileges. It was the exact same performance she used when she drained my college tuition fund, weeping to our parents that she needed a lavish wedding to secure Donovan's wealthy connections and that I was being selfish for wanting a degree. Whenever Melanie faced a consequence, she became the victim, and I became the collateral damage. Donovan saw his opening and immediately played along. He rushed over to Melanie, kneeling beside her chair and wrapping his arms around her shaking shoulders. He buried his face in her neck, playing the role of a desperate, devoted family man. "I did it for us," Donovan sobbed loudly. "I just wanted to give our child the world. I got in too deep, Kelsey. Please have some mercy on your pregnant sister." William stood frozen, his anger momentarily derailed by the mention of his unborn grandchild. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a sickening, pathetic submission to the family narrative. He looked at me, his eyes begging me to fall in line to be the dutiful scapegoat and fix the disaster just like Catherine demanded. I did not yell back. I did not rip my arm out of my mother's grip. I simply reached down with my free hand and calmly unpried Catherine's fingers from my blazer one by one. I let her hand drop to her side. Without saying a single word, I turned away from the dining table and walked slowly into the adjacent open-concept kitchen. The heavy silence followed me. The only sound in the house was Melanie's theatrical, rhythmic sobbing. I walked straight up to the massive stainless steel refrigerator. Pinned right in the center, held up by a silver magnetic clip, was a glossy printout of a sonogram. It had been proudly displayed there for 3 weeks, the centerpiece of my parents boasting to their country club friends. I pulled the ultrasound photo out from under the magnet. I walked back into the formal dining room and tossed the glossy image directly onto the center of the mahogany table. It landed right next to the federal audit documents. I reached into my briefcase one final time and pulled out my tablet. I tapped the screen to wake it up, opened a bookmarked web browser, and flipped the device around so the bright screen faced my parents. Displayed clearly on the high-resolution screen was the exact same ultrasound image. Every gray shadow, every pixelated curve, and every medical timestamp matched the photo on the table perfectly. Bold text hovered right above the image on the tablet. It was a digital listing for a premium stock photography website. The image cost exactly $12.99 to download. I looked down at Melanie, who had completely stopped crying. Her hands were still frozen over her stomach. "You are not pregnant, Melanie," I said, my voice slicing through the room like a scalpel. "You faked it to pressure Dad into giving Donovan the $2 million so he could pay off his bookie before the loan sharks broke his legs." Melanie's hands froze over her stomach. The trembling, fragile posture evaporated in a fraction of a second. She slowly lowered her arms, her back straightening as the pathetic weeping victim persona melted away, revealing the absolute monster underneath. Her tears literally stopped falling. She stared at the tablet screen displaying the $12 stock photo, her jaw working furiously as her brain failed to find another lie to hide behind. Then she snapped. Melanie slammed both hands down on the mahogany table, making the fine china rattle. Her face twisted into an ugly, vicious sneer, her eyes burning with pure, concentrated hatred. "You always were a jealous, pathetic loser," Melanie screamed, her voice losing every ounce of its carefully curated sweetness. "You have been completely obsessed with ruining my life since we were teenagers. You cannot stand that I have everything you do not. I have the husband, the lifestyle, the respect. Look at you. You are 33, sitting alone in a basement, crunching numbers, desperate for our parents to finally pat you on the head. You are nothing. You are a bitter, lonely spinster who brought fake federal documents to a dinner party just to steal my spotlight." I did not blink. I stood perfectly still, letting her toxic energy crash against my absolute calm. My silence only infuriated her more. She wanted me to scream back. She wanted me to lose control so she could point her finger and call me the crazy one. When I refused to give her the satisfaction, her rage boiled over into reckless, unhinged arrogance. "You think you are so smart with your little briefcase?" Melanie spat, taking a step toward me, her manicured finger jabbing the air. "But you are stupid, Kelsey. You have always been stupid. You actually thought Mom and Dad turned against you naturally. You thought they just woke up one day and decided you were the family failure." Catherine let out a sharp gasp, stepping back from her golden child. "Melanie, stop," she warned, her voice trembling. But Melanie was too far gone. The mask was completely off, and the sheer arrogance of a lifetime without consequences made her reckless. She wanted to hurt me. She wanted to prove her absolute dominance in the family hierarchy, completely blind to the federal disaster unfolding around her. "No, let her hear it," Melanie snapped, never taking her eyes off me. "I made them hate you, Kelsey. It was so incredibly easy. Who do you think intercepted those warning letters from your university when your grades slipped? I took them right out of the mailbox and threw them in the trash so you would not have time to fix your GPA. Who do you think told Dad you were using your tuition money to fund weekend trips? I spun every single story. I gaslit you until you questioned your own sanity, and then I played the perfect concerned sister while telling Mom you were beyond saving." William stared at his eldest daughter, his jaw hanging slightly slack. He looked as though someone had physically struck him. The color that had rushed back into his face drained away all over again. "And it was not just school," Melanie continued, her voice rising in a triumphant crescendo. "Who do you think deleted the voicemails from that prestigious accounting firm that wanted to offer you an internship? I went into your phone while you were in the shower and wiped them. I watched you cry for a week because you thought you were not good enough. And when you finally broke down, I told Mom you were too lazy to even follow up with potential employers." Catherine swayed on her feet, grabbing the back of a dining chair for support. "You did what?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I systematically removed you from this family," Melanie bragged, a twisted smile pulling at her lips as she ignored our mother. "I made absolutely sure you were branded the black sheep. I secured my spot as the sole heir to this estate while you were sleeping in the back of your pathetic Honda Civic. I won, Kelsey. I won years ago. And you think pulling up a stock photo of a sonogram changes the fact that Mom and Dad will always choose me. They will always protect me. They will pay Donovan's debts to keep my name out of the papers, and you will go back to being the miserable outcast. I looked from Melanie to my parents. Catherine had a hand clamped over her mouth, horror washing over her meticulously powdered face. William looked like a man waking up from a 30-year coma, the absolute realization of his blind favoritism hitting him with the force of a freight train. He had alienated his youngest daughter and leveraged his entire life savings for a daughter who just proudly admitted to manipulating his every move. I let the heavy silence hang for a long moment before I finally spoke. "There is no estate left to inherit Melanie," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Dad just admitted he took out second mortgages and leveraged every cent of his retirement to fund Donovan. The money is gone. The federal government is seizing this house and everything in it by the end of the week. You did all of that scheming just to inherit a mountain of federal debt. Melanie's triumphant sneer faltered. Her eyes darted to Donovan, waiting for him to step up and defend their wealth to tell me I was wrong. But Donovan was not looking at me. He was staring at Melanie with wide, bloodshot eyes. His chest heaved as panic completely consumed him. The reality of federal prison was staring him right in the face, and his wife had just stood in front of witnesses and proven she was a calculating, ruthless manipulator who would throw anyone under the bus to save herself. He realized in that exact second that Melanie was preparing to build her legal defense strategy right in front of him. The fake pregnancy was not just to get the $2 million from William. It was a preemptive shield to play the innocent, ignorant housewife. She was going to let him take the fall alone. Donovan's face contorted with sheer terror and sudden explosive rage. He lunged away from the antique credenza, pointing a shaking finger directly at his wife. "Tell them the truth, Melanie!" Donovan screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "Tell them you knew!" Melanie physically recoiled, her eyes widening in genuine shock as her husband turned on her. "Donovan, shut up," she hissed frantically. "I will not shut up!" Donovan roared, the veins bulging in his neck. "You knew the money was stolen. You knew there was no software platform. I told you 3 months ago that the feds were sniffing around the Cayman accounts, and you told me to keep pulling funds. Do not let her pin this all on me. You signed the wire transfers for the shopping sprees in Paris. You authorized the payments for the yacht rentals using the corporate shell accounts. You spent the stolen pension money just as fast as I did." Donovan's confession hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Melanie lunged at him, her manicured hands hooked into actual claws, screaming that he was a liar and a coward. They tore into each other like feral animals, fighting over scraps, their carefully curated high society facade completely burning to the ground in front of our eyes. William could not take it anymore. The patriarch of the family, the man who demanded absolute respect and unquestioning submission from everyone in his orbit, slammed his heavy fist onto the mahogany table. The impact rattled the silver candlesticks and sent a crystal wine glass tipping over. Dark red liquid spilled across the pristine white tablecloth, pooling like blood. "Silence!" William roared. His voice boomed with the practiced, terrifying authority he used to break his subordinates in the corporate boardroom. He completely ignored the two criminals bickering at the end of the table and turned his absolute fury onto me. His face was a deep mottled purple, the veins in his neck bulging aggressively against his starched white collar. He marched around the table, puffing out his chest, attempting to use his physical size to loom over me and intimidate me exactly the way he always had when I was a child. He stopped just inches from where I stood, pointing a thick accusatory finger directly at my face. "You listen to me very carefully, Kelsey." William snarled, genuine venom dripping from every syllable. "I do not care what federal agency you claim to work for. I do not care about your little forensic accounting firm. You are my daughter, and you owe this family. You are going to open your laptop right now, access your company accounts, and you are going to wire $2 million to cover my losses. You will fix this mess, you will bury this audit, and you will do it tonight." I stared at the finger pointed right between my eyes. I did not step back. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. "I owe you absolutely nothing," I said, my voice barely above a whisper yet carrying the weight of absolute finality. William scoffed, a harsh, guttural sound of pure, unadulterated disbelief. "You owe me everything," he shouted. I gave you a roof over your head. I fed you. I put clothes on your back. If you refuse to fix this, I will destroy you. I am William Caldwell. I will hire the most vicious corporate lawyers on the East Coast. I will sue you for defamation. I will sue your firm for corporate espionage. I will drag you through years of litigation until you are completely bankrupt. I will take your company, Kelsey, and I will ruin you. Catherine, standing just behind him, nodded vigorously. Her face was twisted in a smug, vindictive sneer, entirely confident that her husband's aggressive bluster would immediately force me into submission. I looked at the man who had spent my entire life making me feel small and insignificant. He was not a giant anymore. He was just an angry, desperate old man throwing a massive tantrum because he had finally lost control of the narrative. "You are going to ruin me," I repeated, tilting my head slightly as I studied his purple face. That is a fascinating threat, Dad, especially coming from a man whose judgment is so notoriously flawless. I picked up a heavy silver spoon and tapped it lightly against the edge of my water glass. The sharp clink echoed in the sudden quiet of the room. "Do you remember my college graduation?" I asked. My tone was conversational, almost pleasant, which only seemed to enrage him further. "I remember it vividly. You did not want to be there. You complained the entire drive. And when my department held their reception, they passed a microphone around for the parents to say a few words of encouragement. Do you remember what you said when they handed the microphone to you?" William's jaw tightened. He glared at me, refusing to answer. "I will remind you," I continued, taking a slow step toward him, forcing him to hold his ground. "You laughed. You looked around at the other parents, you laughed directly into the microphone, and you said I was a completely useless dropout who was wasting her life. You told an entire room of my professors and peers that I was a bad investment. You humiliated me in public just to make yourself look like the pragmatic, hard-nosed businessman who demanded nothing but excellence." I stopped pacing and locked eyes with him, letting my cold demeanor shatter his aggressive posturing. "Well, Dad, let us look at your investments." I gestured toward Melanie, who was currently glaring daggers at Donovan, her face blotchy and red with fury. "You invested your unconditional love and your entire estate into a daughter who just proudly admitted to manipulating you, intercepting my mail, and sabotaging my career just to secure her inheritance. You raised a parasite who views you as nothing more than a walking bank account." I turned my hand toward Donovan, who was sweating through his tailored suit, looking desperately at the front door. "And you invested your entire retirement portfolio, your second mortgage, and your pristine reputation into a con artist who used your money to pay off illegal sports betting debts in the Bahamas. You threw away your entire life savings on a fake software company because you were too arrogant to actually verify the prospectus." William opened his mouth to shout, his face contorting with sheer rage, but I cut him off before he could form a single word. I, on the other hand, invested in myself. I built a firm that the federal government trusts to dismantle criminal empires, exactly like the one your brilliant son-in-law fabricated. I am the bad investment, Dad. You backed a federal criminal and a sociopath. You backed the wrong horse. William's chest heaved heavily. His hands balled into tight fists at his sides. The absolute reality of his monumental failure was staring him right in the face, but his massive ego refused to let him surrender. He let out a low, dangerous growl and reached into his tailored jacket pocket, pulling out his expensive smartphone. "You think you are so smart?" William spat his thumb, jabbing aggressively at the screen. "You think you can talk to me this way in my own house? We are done here. I am calling my legal team right now. I am going to have them draft the lawsuits tonight. You will be served by morning Kelsey. I will see to it that you never work in the financial sector again." He lifted the phone to his ear, his eyes blazing with the promise of utter destruction. I did not try to stop him. I simply reached back into my leather briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was not a glossy photograph or a bound dossier. It was a standard black and white printout of an email. I held it out, extending it into the space between us. "You cannot hire a lawyer, Dad," I said. William froze, the phone still pressed to his ear. He glared at the piece of paper in my hand, stubbornly refusing to take it. I stepped closer and pressed the paper directly against his chest, forcing his hand to instinctively grab it before it fluttered to the floor. Because of Donovan's fraud tying directly back to your personal accounts, the federal authorities categorized you as an active co-conspirator, I explained, my voice ringing out with clinical precision. The bank froze all of your assets at exactly 4 o'clock this afternoon. You're checking your savings, your equity lines, and your remaining retirement funds are completely locked. You literally have $0 to your name. William stared at the black and white printout. His eyes darted back and forth across the bank headers, the timestamps, and the staggering zero balances. The paper rattled violently in his shaking hand. The majestic, untouchable patriarch of the Caldwell family looked like a deflated balloon. The reality of his absolute financial destruction hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Donovan broke the silence. He snatched the paper directly from William's trembling fingers, his own eyes scanning the text. "No," Donovan gasped, stepping back until his spine hit the wall. "No, this is impossible. The offshore accounts were supposed to clear tomorrow morning. I had a grace period." "I did not," I stated plainly. Federal agents flagged the outgoing domestic transfers at 3 o'clock. The freeze hit at exactly 4. Your guy in Vegas is not getting his money, Donovan, and neither are you. The atmosphere in this room shifted entirely. It was no longer a space of arrogant posturing and country club superiority. It devolved instantly into the primal claustrophobic panic of a sinking ship. The facade of the wealthy, untouchable Caldwells shattered completely, revealing the desperate, cornered animals beneath. William looked up from his empty hands. His face had transitioned from a purple rage to a sickly, desperate gray. He looked at Donovan, then at the exits, and finally his gaze locked onto my leather briefcase. I watched the exact moment his brain bypassed every boundary of morality, logic, and parental decency, landing squarely on raw, unadulterated survival. He needed capital to run, and I was the only person in the room with access to clean money. He moved with a sudden, startling speed for a man his age. William stepped sideways, planting his large frame directly in the center of the heavy double mahogany doors that led to the foyer. He crossed his arms over his chest, his jaw set in a hard, dangerous line. Catching the unspoken signal, Donovan mirrored the movement. His rat-like survival instincts kicked into overdrive. He pushed himself off the wall and slid across the Persian rug, planting his body squarely in the archway leading to the kitchen. The two men had effectively sealed the only exits from the formal dining room. I stood in the center of the space, surrounded by the remnants of their ruined empire, physically blocked from leaving. "Open the laptop," Kelsey, William commanded. His voice was no longer a booming roar. It was a low, terrifying growl. It was the voice of a man who had absolutely nothing left to lose and was perfectly willing to destroy his own flesh and blood to save himself. I kept my hands folded casually in front of me. "I am not opening anything." William took one heavy step forward, his dress shoes silent on the expensive rug. "You are going to sit down at this table. You are going to log into your firm's operating accounts. And you are going to wire $500,000 to an untraceable crypto wallet Donovan is going to provide you. You have that kind of liquid capital. I know exactly how much your agency clears in a quarter." "You are asking me to fund your flight from federal prosecution," I replied, keeping my tone steady, betraying none of the adrenaline spiking in my veins. "I am not asking," William sneered, dropping his arms and clenching his hands into massive fists. "I am telling you, you are going to transfer the funds so we can get on a plane tonight. If you refuse, you are not leaving this room. Do you understand me? You are not walking out of this house until that money is in our accounts." I looked at Donovan. He was shifting his weight from foot to foot, his eyes darting wildly, sweating profusely. He nodded in agreement with William, blocking the kitchen exit with his shoulders squared. They were actually going to hold me hostage. The absolute insanity of their entitlement had crossed the line into physical extortion. "This is kidnapping," I stated clearly, letting the heavy word ring off the crystal chandeliers. "You are committing another felony to cover up the first one." Suddenly, Catherine pushed her way past William's shoulder. Her face was streaked with ruined makeup, her eyes wide and feverish with toxic delusion. She did not express a single ounce of horror, that her husband and son-in-law were physically trapping her daughter. Instead, she leaned into the madness, completely abandoning reality and justifying their thuggery with her ultimate narcissistic entitlement. "We gave you life!" Catherine shrieked, pointing a shaking manicured finger at my face. Her voice was shrill and desperate, echoing harshly in the confined space. "Do not stand there and act like you are a victim. You owe us your life." Catherine stepped closer, her chest heaving as she unleashed a lifetime of venom. "We clothed you, we fed you, we put a roof over your head. This family is falling apart, and you are standing there clutching your pearls over a few $100,000. You have a duty to protect this family. Sit down and make the transfer. You owe us your absolute loyalty." I looked at my mother, a woman who had spent 33 years emotionally discarding me, now claiming ownership over my existence simply because she needed a scapegoat to fund her escape. Melanie was still sitting at the table, completely silent, watching the men corner me with a look of detached, shell-shocked self-preservation. She wasn't going to lift a finger to help me. The air in the room was thick with the threat of imminent violence. William took another step forward, his shadow falling over me. He was close enough now that I could smell the scotch on his breath and see the desperate, dangerous glint in his eyes. He reached out his massive hand, moving to grab my shoulder and force me into the nearest chair. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply raised my left arm, pulling my wrist up between us. I tapped the illuminated screen of my smartwatch twice with my index finger. The small device glowed brightly in the dimming light of the dining room. "I wouldn't block that door if I were you," I said, my voice dropping to a register of absolute ice. William froze, his hand hovering mere inches from my shoulder. He stared at the watch, confusion warring with his anger. "My private security detail is parked in the black SUV directly across the street," I stated, staring dead into my father's panicked eyes. "They have been tracking my location and my heart rate since I stepped foot on your property. Should I press the panic button, or do you want to step aside?" William's eyes darted to the glowing screen on my wrist. The color, what little was left of it, drained from his face entirely. He looked toward the heavy velvet drapes covering the front windows, as if expecting armed guards to crash through the glass at any second. The reality of his absolute powerlessness finally punctured his massive ego. He was not a titan of industry. He was a cornered old man about to commit a violent felony, and he knew he had been caught. Slowly, William lowered his fists. He took a staggering step backward, peeling his body away from the mahogany doors. Donovan instantly followed suit, practically leaping away from the kitchen archway and pressing himself back against the wall, holding his hands up in a pathetic gesture of surrender. The physical threat evaporated, leaving behind a suffocating stench of pure cowardice. Catherine watched her husband and son-in-law retreat, and something inside her finally snapped. The extortion attempt had failed. Her golden child was a fraud. Her husband's retirement was gone. The carefully curated, picture-perfect reality she had spent 3 decades worshipping was completely in ashes. She let out a sound that was half sob, half scream, grabbing the edges of the dining table as if the floor was violently tilting beneath her. "We do not need you!" Catherine suddenly shrieked, her voice cracking with hysterical, desperate defiance. She pointed a manicured finger at the ceiling, her eyes wild and feverish. "We do not need your filthy money, Kelsey. You think you hold all the cards, but you know absolutely nothing. We have the estate." She gestured frantically around the massive chandelier-lit dining room, her diamond rings flashing under the light. This house will save us. We will just put it on the market tomorrow morning. It is a seller's market, and this property is the crown jewel of the neighborhood. We will sell the estate, pay back the bank, cover the stolen funds, and we will start over. We will rebuild. We are Caldwells, and we always land on our feet. You can take your little security detail and get the hell out of my home." Melanie, sensing a lifeline, immediately latched onto our mother's frantic delusion. The pure, unadulterated arrogance flooded right back into her tear-stained face. She stood up from her chair, wiping the ruined mascara from her cheeks, adjusting her silk blouse with a haughty, superior twitch of her shoulders. "Mom is exactly right," Melanie sneered, her voice dripping with the familiar, condescending venom I had endured my entire life. She stepped up to stand beside Catherine, forming their impenetrable toxic wall of denial. This house has been in our family for 4 generations, Kelsey. It sits on 2 acres of pristine, historically protected real estate. It was appraised at $7 million just last year. We can liquidate this property in a week to a cash buyer, clear Donovan's debts, and still have millions left over to buy a luxury condo downtown. Melanie crossed her arms, looking me up and down with absolute disgust. You thought you could come in here and watch us beg. You thought you finally had us backed into a corner. But you forgot who we are. We have generational wealth built into the very walls of this house. You will never have anything close to this. You will go back to your sad, lonely little life, and we will brush this off like a minor inconvenience. We are cutting you out completely. You will not see a single dime of this sale. I watched them. I watched my mother and sister cling to the drywall and crystal chandeliers as their ultimate salvation. I watched my father silently nod along, desperately wanting to believe that the bricks and mortar around him could shield him from federal prison. I let them build their beautiful, impossible fantasy for a few seconds longer. Then I slowly shook my head. The movement was slight, but it carried the weight of an executioner's axe. You cannot sell the house, Mom, I said, my voice cutting through their hysterical planning with cold, clinical precision. Catherine scoffed, rolling her eyes. Watch me. I will call the broker tonight. You do not own it anymore, I interrupted, taking a single step forward, forcing the entire room to fall dead silent. Catherine froze. Melanie's arms dropped to her sides. William stopped breathing entirely. I turned my gaze to Donovan, who was currently attempting to merge his body with the floral wallpaper. He was shaking so violently, I could hear his dress shoes tapping against the baseboards. Tell them, Donovan, I commanded quietly. Or do you want me to do it? Donovan squeezed his eyes shut and let out a pathetic, whimpering sob. He slid slowly down the wall until he was crouched on the floor, burying his face in his hands. Fine, I said, turning back to my mother, who was now staring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. 2 years ago, when Donovan first pitched his brilliant tech startup to the family, Dad was not his only investor. Donovan convinced you both to leverage the primary asset. He told you it was a temporary cash flow measure, a bridge loan to get the IPO off the ground. Catherine's lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked at William, whose eyes had glazed over with absolute horror. You and Dad quietly took out a secret, massive second mortgage on this estate. I continued detailing the financial suicide they had willingly committed. You signed the paperwork right at this very table. You handed Donovan $3 million in equity. And because this house has been in the family for 4 generations, because it was fully paid off, the bank was more than happy to hand over the cash. I took another step closer to Catherine, letting the truth crush her entirely. Donovan did not put that equity into a startup. He gambled it away. And when the offshore bookies demanded their money, he stopped making the payments on your secret mortgage. He has not paid the bank a single cent in 6 months. Melanie let out a sharp, breathless gasp. Mom? She whispered, her voice trembling. Mom, what is she talking about? Catherine was hyperventilating, clutching her chest as she stared at William for a denial that was never going to come. The bank sent the delinquency notices, I stated, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. But Donovan intercepted the mail. Just like Melanie intercepted mine. He hid the warnings. He hid the default notices. He hid the intent to accelerate. I reached into my briefcase one last time. I did not pull out a packet. I pulled out a single, heavily stamped legal document. I dropped it onto the center of the mahogany table, right on top of the fake ultrasound and the federal audit records. Because you missed 6 consecutive payments, the grace period expired, I said, watching my mother's knees buckle slightly. The bank initiated the final proceedings. You cannot sell the house, Mom. You cannot liquidate the estate to save yourselves. The bank formally foreclosed on this property last Tuesday. You do not have generational wealth. You are trespassing. William recoiled as if the word had physically struck him. His wide, bloodshot eyes darted wildly around the formal dining room, scanning the crown, molding the imported silk drapes, and the antique grandfather clock ticking relentlessly in the corner. His breathing turned jagged and shallow, loud gasps of air echoing in the deafening silence of the room. The absolute reality of his entire identity being wiped out in a single stroke was short-circuiting his brain. Foreclosed. William choked out his hands, gripping the edge of the mahogany table so hard his knuckles turned bone white. No, absolutely not. I am the owner of this estate. My name is on the deed. We have not been evicted. He spun around, nearly tripping over Donovan's cowering form on the floor, and marched toward the massive antique credenza against the far wall. His movements were frantic, stripped of all his usual patriarchal dignity. He yanked the heavy oak drawers open with such violent force that one came entirely off its tracks, spilling silver serving utensils and linen napkins onto the Persian rug. "Catherine! Catherine, get the files from my study!" William roared, his voice cracking into a hysterical pitch. "Get the property tax receipts. Get the original deed. She is lying. She is trying to trick us. I will show her the signatures." Catherine jolted out of her frozen state. She let out a panicked, breathless cry and practically sprinted out of the dining room, her expensive heels slipping on the polished hardwood floor of the hallway. Melanie remained paralyzed in her chair, her hands gripping her perfectly styled hair, murmuring frantic denials to herself. Donovan continued to weep quietly into his knees, completely useless. I stood perfectly still, watching the untouchable Caldwell family tear their own house apart in a blind, pathetic panic. As William frantically rummaged through the spilled contents of the drawer, hurling silver forks and velvet boxes aside, a profound sense of clarity washed over me. I watched my father scramble on his hands and knees, desperate to cling to the bricks and mortar that defined his entire worth. My mind flashed back to a freezing torrential night exactly 7 years ago. I had been standing in the grand foyer just 20 feet from where I stood now. I had just confronted William about the suspicious discrepancies I found in Melanie's college tuition payments, realizing my sister had been draining my own educational fund for her luxury vacations. Instead of holding Melanie accountable, William had turned his absolute fury onto me. He called me a liar, a jealous failure, and a toxic liability to the family brand. Catherine had marched down the sweeping double staircase carrying a single black plastic garbage bag. She had dumped it at my feet. It contained a handful of my clothes, hastily swept from my closet. William had pointed at the heavy oak front door and ordered me off his property, promising I would end up destitute in the gutter without his backing. They had locked the deadbolt behind me, leaving me standing in the freezing rain with absolutely nothing to my name but a trash bag. I had survived that void. I had taken that garbage bag, slept on a stained mattress in a shared studio apartment, worked 3 jobs, and built an empire out of sheer, unadulterated grit. I had learned how to navigate total ruin. They had not. They had spent those 7 years sitting in this opulent mansion, drinking expensive wine, entirely convinced that their wealth made them invincible. Now the void had come for them, and they were utterly incapable of surviving it. "I found it!" William shouted, pulling himself up from the floor. He was clutching a thick manila folder, his chest heaving with exertion. His suit jacket was rumpled, his tie askew, but a manic, desperate triumph burned in his eyes. He marched back to the dining table and slammed the folder down right next to my federal audit documents. He flipped it open, his trembling fingers pointing aggressively at a stack of yellowing, outdated property records. "Look at this," William demanded, spitting the words at me. "Look at the county seal. Look at my signature. I own this property free and clear. You are trying to scare us with your little accounting tricks, but you have no power here." He leaned across the table, trying to summon the imposing, terrifying authority he had wielded my entire life. His breath was ragged, his face covered in a sheen of cold sweat. "If the bank had foreclosed, there would be a notice on my door," William snarled, slamming his fist onto his outdated paperwork. "A sheriff would have come to this house. We would have received an official mandate to vacate the premises. But nobody has come. We have not been evicted. You are a liar, Kelsey, And you are going to get out of my house before I have you arrested. I let him finish. I let him savor that final fleeting second of false security. I did not raise my voice or match his frantic energy. I reached into my leather briefcase for the very last time. I bypassed the financial summaries and the offshore wire traces. I pulled out a thick, legal-sized packet bound in a heavy blue cover. I dropped the stamped, notarized deed of trust directly onto the table. It landed with a heavy, definitive thud right on top of his outdated property tax receipts. William stared at the blue cover, the triumphant fire in his eyes instantly extinguished, replaced by a dark, creeping terror. You haven't been evicted yet because the bank did not want to deal with the prolonged legal mess of seizing a historic estate, I explained, my voice echoing with absolute icy authority in the silent room. When Donovan defaulted on the secret mortgage, the bank immediately put the debt up for a private distressed sale. They auctioned off the defaulted loan quietly to recoup their immediate losses. Catherine stepped slowly back into the dining room, empty-handed, her face ashen as she listened to my words. I tapped the thick blue packet with my index finger. "The bank sold your debt, Dad," I said, maintaining unblinking eye contact as his entire world collapsed. "And my private holding company bought it. I executed the final transfer of deed yesterday morning. I am the sole owner of this property." William's eyes remained glued to the heavy blue cover of the deed. He slowly reached out his thick, trembling fingers, tracing the embossed seal of the county clerk. He flipped the cover open. The silence in the dining room was absolute, broken only by the ragged, shallow sound of his breathing and the sharp rustle of the thick legal paper. His eyes darted back and forth across the pages. He was desperately searching for a loophole, a clerical error, a typo, anything that would prove his reality had not just been entirely rewritten. But the text was brutally clear. The original debt had been satisfied by a third party. The title had been legally transferred. Apex Holdings, LLC, a company he now knew belonged solely to me, possessed the estate free and clear. The paper slipped from William's hands and fluttered softly onto the mahogany table. His knees buckled and he collapsed heavily into the head chair. The imposing, terrifying patriarch of the Caldwell family instantly vanished. In his place sat a hollow, gray-haired man staring blankly at a crystal wine glass, entirely stripped of his power, his wealth, and his identity. Donovan remained curled on the floor, weeping openly into his hands. Melanie stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, processing the fact that the multi-million-dollar safety net she had just bragged about was entirely gone. It was Catherine who broke the silence. I watched a chilling, instantaneous transformation overtake my mother's face. The hysterical, panicked rage that had twisted her features just moments ago completely melted away. She smoothed her hands over her ruined silk blouse, took a deep breath, and forced her facial muscles into a mask of pure, sickeningly sweet maternal affection. The psychological whiplash was staggering. She had just screamed that I owed them my life, completely willing to watch me be held hostage. Now her eyes shone with manufactured, tearful pride. "Oh, Kelsey," Catherine breathed, taking a slow, delicate step toward me. Her voice was suddenly soft, entirely devoid of the sharp, condescending edge she had used against me for 3 decades. My sweet Kelsey bug. My stomach turned. She had not used that pet name since I was 7 years old, back before she realized Melanie was the prettier, more compliant daughter who would perfectly mirror her own vanity. Catherine took another step, her arms opening wide, tears of profound relief spilling over her lower lashes. "You did it. You bought the house. You saved our family legacy. I always knew you were the smart one, sweetheart. I always knew you had a brilliant mind for business. You swooped in and rescued us from Donovan's terrible mistakes." She moved in to wrap her arms around my shoulders, ready to pull me into the warm, loving embrace of a mother who had just been saved by her devoted child. I stepped back cleanly, leaving her arms grasping at empty air. Catherine stumbled slightly, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second before she expertly pinned it back into place. She let her arms drop, clasping her hands together against her chest in a gesture of overwhelming gratitude. "I know you are upset about earlier," Catherine cooed, her voice practically dripping with syrup. "We were just panicked, darling. Your father and I were just so scared of losing everything we built. But you protected the estate. We can just stay right here, keep the house warm and perfectly maintained for you. We will take care of everything just like we always have." William, sensing a lifeline in his wife's delusional pivot, suddenly sat up straighter in his chair. The color began to return to his face as his corporate survival instincts latched onto this new narrative. He cleared his throat, attempting to project the voice of a seasoned business partner negotiating a mutually beneficial merger. "Your mother is right, Kelsey," William said, forcing a tight professional smile. "It is a brilliant tax shelter. Truly, an exceptional strategic acquisition. You secured a $7 million asset for the price of our defaulted mortgage. We can draft a property management agreement tonight. We will stay on as caretakers. We will manage the grounds, pay the property taxes out of whatever capital I can liquidate, and keep the equity completely secure for your portfolio. We can be a team on this." Melanie eagerly abandoned her weeping husband on the floor and practically skipped over to stand beside our mother. She gave me a wide, desperate, incredibly fake smile. "We can finally be a real family again, Kelsey," Melanie chirped, completely ignoring the fact that she had just proudly admitted to intercepting my mail and sabotaging my career. "I can even help you redecorate the guest wings. We can host Sunday dinners here. Just the Caldwells." I looked at the three of them. They were staring at me with wide, expectant eyes, perfectly willing to erase decades of emotional abuse, financial sabotage, and a literal extortion attempt that occurred less than 10 minutes ago, simply to maintain their comfortable reality. They truly believed I was desperate enough for their love that I would just hand them the keys to my kingdom. "You really are incredible," I said, my voice echoing coldly in the grand dining room. I looked directly into Catherine's eyes, watching the fake maternal warmth slowly begin to curdle. "10 minutes ago, you demanded I wire you $500,000 and cheered while my father and Donovan physically trapped me in this room. You told me I owed you my life simply because you provided a roof over my head." I shifted my gaze to William. "And 7 years ago, when I begged you to look at the bank statements proving Melanie was draining my college fund, you threw a plastic garbage bag of my clothes onto the porch and locked the deadbolt while I stood in the freezing rain. You told me I would end up in the gutter." William swallowed hard, looking away, unable to meet my eyes. "I did not buy this estate to save your legacy." I continued, my tone absolute and unyielding. "I bought it because it was a highly profitable, distressed asset, and because I wanted to be the one holding the deed when reality finally caught up with you." I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a sleek metal clipboard with a pen attached to the side. 2 crisp, professionally printed documents were clipped to the front. Catherine's eyes darted to the clipboard, the last remnants of her saccharine smile vanishing entirely. "Kelsey, please," she whispered, her voice finally breaking with genuine, uncalculated fear. "This is our home." I stepped back from my mother, eliminating the last inch of space between us, and held the clipboard out, extending it directly into her chest. "Here are your 2 options," I said, my voice ringing with total, uncompromising finality. "Sign this lease agreement for $6,000 a month in rent, or sign this 48-hour eviction notice. Your choice." Catherine stared at the metal clipboard as if I had just handed her a live grenade. The words printed on the thick parchment seemed to swim before her eyes, but the bold black numbers at the bottom of the page were unmistakably clear. $6,000 a month, or 48 hours to pack up 30 years of accumulated wealth and vacate the premises. The reality of her new position crashed down upon her with the force of a physical blow. The saccharine-manufactured warmth vanished from her face, replaced instantly by raw, unfiltered panic. She dropped the clipboard onto the mahogany table. Her hands flew to her mouth, and a harsh, ragged wail tore from her throat. It was a sound of absolute, unadulterated defeat. William slumped forward in his heavy chair, burying his face in his hands. He did not yell. He did not threaten me with his lawyers. The imposing patriarch of the Caldwell family simply wept, his broad shoulders shaking as the reality of his complete financial annihilation finally sank in. He was a tenant in the house he had lorded over his entire life, entirely at the mercy of the daughter he had thrown into the street. I watched them break. I felt absolutely no pity, no regret, and no sorrow. The air in the formal dining room was suffocating thick with the stench of their shattered egos and ruined legacies. I needed a moment to breathe. I turned my back on my weeping parents and walked through the heavy swinging doors into the massive marble-clad chef's kitchen. The kitchen was dark, illuminated only by the soft glow of the under-cabinet lighting. I walked over to the stainless steel refrigerator, poured myself a glass of ice water, and took a long, steadying sip. The swinging door creaked open behind me. I turned to see Donovan slipping into the kitchen. He pushed the door shut immediately, cutting off the sound of Catherine's hysterical sobbing from the dining room. I expected him to still be cowering, begging for mercy, the way he had been on the floor just minutes ago. Instead, his posture had completely transformed. The pathetic weeping rat was gone. In his place stood the smooth-talking, impeccably tailored con artist who had successfully swindled my father out of millions. Donovan smoothed the lapels of his expensive suit jacket, checked the cuffs of his shirt, and flashed me a bright, unnervingly confident smile. He walked across the imported tile floor, moving with the arrogant swagger of a man who firmly believed he could talk his way out of a burning building. "You really are brilliant, Kelsey," Donovan said, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial whisper as he leaned against the marble island. "I have to admit, I completely underestimated you. I thought you were just a bitter accountant trying to settle a petty family score, but buying the debt from the bank right out from under them? That was masterful. You outplayed every single one of us in that room. I respect that, I really do." I set my water glass down on the counter, keeping my face entirely blank. "What do you want, Donovan?" He stepped closer, invading my personal space, attempting to use his height and his practiced charm to disarm me. He lowered his voice even further, casting a quick glance toward the closed dining room door. "I want to make a deal," Donovan murmured, his eyes locking onto mine with a predatory gleam. "You and I are the only smart people in this house, Kelsey. William is a dinosaur. He is a sinking ship with a massive ego. He handed over his entire life savings to me without running a single background check or verifying a single line of my prospectus. He was so desperate to have a son-in-law he could brag about at the country club that he practically begged me to take his money. He deserved to lose it." I crossed my arms over my chest, letting him dig his own grave. "And what about Melanie?" Donovan laughed. It was a harsh, cruel sound that echoed sharply in the quiet kitchen. "Melanie is a parasite." He sneered, a look of profound disgust washing over his handsome face. "You think I actually love your sister? Please." The golden couple routine was nothing more than a strategic business transaction. She gave me unrestricted access to your father's accounts, and I gave her a shiny diamond ring to show off to her vapid, shallow friends. He scoffed, shaking his head, as if the mere thought of his wife repulsed him. "She is completely empty, Kelsey. An absolute void of a human being who only cares about designer bags and maintaining her country club status. Do you know how easy she was to manipulate? All I had to do was promise her that our fake company would make her wealthier and more important than you. That is all she ever cared about, outshining you. The woman is a high-maintenance nightmare, and I am sick of pretending I can stand the sight of her." Donovan leaned over the marble island, placing both of his hands flat on the counter as he delivered his ultimate pitch. "Here is my offer," he said, his voice urgent and intense. "The federal agents froze the domestic transfers, but they do not know about the offshore accounts in the Caymans. There is still $3 million sitting in an untraceable wallet. I can access it right now from my phone. You have the audit. You have the evidence that will put William and me away for a very long time. But if you let me walk out the back door right now, if you give me a 4-hour head start before you hand that flash drive over to the authorities, I will wire you half of the offshore cash." He gave me a desperate, searching look, waiting for my greed to match his own. $1.5 million clean and untraceable, Kelsey. We throw William under the bus. I file for divorce from Melanie the second I land in a non-extradition country. We leave them both holding the bag. They ruined your life. They kicked you out on the street. They deserve to take the fall for this. Help me get out of here and you can watch them burn while you walk away richer than ever. I let his words hang in the air. I let him believe that his silver-tongued manipulation had worked. I let him savor the illusion of escape. I picked up my water glass and took another slow sip. Then I smiled. It was not a small, polite smile. It was a wide, genuine, razor-sharp smile that caused Donovan's confident posture to falter. "That is a very compelling offer, Donovan," I said, keeping my tone perfectly conversational. I reached into the front pocket of my blazer and pulled out my smartphone. The screen was brightly illuminated, showing an active, ongoing phone call. I held the device up between us, making sure the screen was directly in his line of sight. I raised my voice, projecting clearly and loudly into the phone's microphone. "Hey, Melanie, did you hear that?" Donovan frowned, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Who are you talking to?" I locked eyes with him, watching the exact moment the color drained from his face. When I walked into the dining room earlier tonight, I synced my phone to the house's integrated smart system. I stated, enunciating every single syllable with absolute precision. "Right now, this phone call is actively broadcasting through the surround sound Bluetooth speakers directly over the dining room table." Donovan stumbled backward, his back slamming hard against the stainless steel refrigerator. His mouth dropped open in sheer, unadulterated horror. "Melanie heard every single word you just said." I continued, my smile widening as the sound of a shattering glass echoed violently from the dining room. "She heard you call her a parasite. She heard you call your marriage a sham. And she just heard you offer to abandon her to federal prison while you run off to the Caymans with her father's money." The heavy swinging doors to the kitchen suddenly burst open. Melanie slammed through the heavy swinging doors with such violent momentum that the brass hinges shrieked. Her perfectly manicured facade was entirely gone. Her face was mottled with a furious, ugly red, and her eyes were wide with a feral kind of rage. She did not hesitate. She lunged directly at Donovan, her hands curled into claws, aiming right for his face. Donovan threw his arms up, stumbling backward against the stainless steel refrigerator, as Melanie's nails caught the side of his neck. "A parasite." Melanie shrieked, her voice tearing through the kitchen at a deafening pitch. "You think I am a parasite? You lying, manipulative coward? I gave you everything. I convinced my father to trust you." Donovan shoved her back with enough force to send her stumbling into the marble island. The suave, calculated con artist completely vanished, replaced by a cornered, vicious animal. "You did not give me anything," Melanie Donovan roared back, rubbing the angry red scratch on his neck. "You were an easy mark. You were so desperate for a husband who looked good on a country club brochure that you never bothered to look at a single financial document. You are stupid. Your father is arrogant. And you both handed me the keys to the vault on a silver platter." William staggered into the kitchen right behind his daughter. He looked gray and diminished, but the sheer disrespect from the man he had chosen over his own flesh and blood ignited a final desperate spark of patriarchal fury. "You will not speak to my daughter that way," William bellowed, pointing a trembling finger at Donovan. "I will destroy you. I will have my lawyers tie you up in litigation for the rest of your natural life. I will see you rot in a federal cell." Donovan let out a sharp, barking laugh. "What lawyers, William? You cannot even afford the retainer fees anymore. Kelsey owns your house. The feds are tracking your domestic accounts. You have absolutely nothing left, and I am not sticking around to watch you sink." He turned to bolt for the back door leading to the garden. Melanie threw herself into his path, grabbing handfuls of his expensive suit jacket, screaming that he was not going anywhere. Donovan grabbed her wrists, trying to pry her off, shouting for her to let go. I remained leaning against the kitchen counter, sipping my ice water. The untouchable Caldwells were physically wrestling in their own kitchen like common street brawlers. Then Catherine made her move. My mother stepped slowly through the swinging doors. She looked at her golden daughter, shrieking like a banshee. She looked at the son-in-law who had just stripped them of their wealth and dignity. Finally, she looked at me. She saw the absolute unyielding coldness in my eyes. She knew her saccharine maternal routine had failed. She knew her authority was gone. So Catherine played her final ultimate card. She let out a sharp, ragged gasp. Her hand flew to her chest, clutching the pearls at her throat. Her eyes rolled upward, fluttering dramatically as her knees buckled. William Catherine choked out her voice, a fragile, breathy whisper. My heart. The pain. She collapsed. It was a perfectly executed theatrical descent, ending with her crumpled on the imported tile floor, her hand still gripping her chest as she took shallow, rapid breaths. Melanie and Donovan instantly stopped grappling. Donovan used the distraction to yank his jacket free, shoving past Melanie and sprinting out the back door into the night. Melanie did not chase him. She stared down at her mother in horror. Catherine William cried out. He dropped to his knees on the hard tile, frantically hovering over his wife. He grabbed her hand, his face pale with genuine terror. Kathy, look at me. Breathe. Just breathe. Mom, Melanie shrieked, dropping to her knees on the other side of her. I did not move. I stood by the marble island watching the performance. It was a classic Catherine Caldwell maneuver. Growing up, whenever a situation spiraled out of her control, whenever someone dared to challenge her absolute authority, she would suddenly become the victim of a mysterious, debilitating medical crisis. A sudden migraine, heart palpitations, a fainting spell. It was her guaranteed method to instantly shut down any argument, force everyone to cater to her needs, and shift the blame entirely onto whoever had caused her such severe distress. William looked up from Catherine's faking, fluttering eyelids. He locked his bloodshot eyes onto me, his face contorted with a mixture of terror and absolute venomous hatred. You are killing your mother, William screamed at me, his voice cracking with hysterical fury. Are you happy now? Call 911. The blame washed over me, cold and familiar. It was always my fault. If Melanie failed a class, it was because I stressed her out. If William lost a client, it was because I was an ungrateful distraction. If Catherine faked a heart attack, it was because I was a toxic, unloving daughter who was actively trying to destroy the family. Call them, Kelsey. Melanie sobbed, clutching Catherine's other hand. Call an ambulance. She cannot breathe. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I did not rush. My fingers were perfectly steady as I unlocked the screen. I looked down at Catherine. Her eyes were squeezed shut, but her breathing was entirely too controlled for someone experiencing a massive cardiac event. She was waiting for me to panic. She was waiting for me to drop to my knees, beg for her forgiveness, and surrender my leverage in a desperate bid to save her life. I raised the phone to my ear. They are already on their way, Dad, I said, my voice echoing with icy calm across the kitchen. Catherine's eyelids twitched. I kept my gaze locked onto William's panicked face. But the ambulance is not coming alone. Before William could process the words, a sound pierced the heavy, suffocating atmosphere of the kitchen. Faint at first, but growing rapidly louder, cutting through the silence of the affluent neighborhood. The shrill, unmistakable wail of approaching sirens. The wail of the sirens amplified until it rattled the crystal glasses in the cabinets. Then the flashing lights hit. Aggressive bursts of red and blue strobed violently through the massive floor-to-ceiling kitchen windows, painting the pristine marble countertops in harsh, rotating colors. The heavy crunch of tires skidding onto the gravel driveway echoed through the estate. Multiple vehicle doors slammed shut in rapid succession. Heavy synchronized footsteps pounded up the front portico. William froze, his hands hovering over Catherine. That is not just an ambulance, he muttered, his voice thick with confusion and rising panic. Federal agents, open the door. The booming voice from the front foyer was immediately followed by a thunderous, splintering crash. The heavy oak front door had been breached. At the exact moment the wood splintered, a medical miracle occurred on the kitchen floor. Catherine, who had been gasping for her supposedly final breaths, let out a sharp squeak. Her eyes snapped wide open, bright and entirely alert. The crippling chest pain miraculously vanished. She scrambled to her feet with the speed and agility of a startled gymnast, frantically smoothing down her skirt and patting her hair into place. Her miraculous resurrection was the final pathetic proof of her lifelong manipulation. Agents wearing dark windbreakers with FBI and SEC emblazoned in bold yellow letters poured into the grand foyer. They swarmed the hallway, their heavy tactical boots, leaving muddy prints all over Catherine's imported Persian rugs. "Stay exactly where you are," a voice commanded. "Keep your hands visible." Out in the pitch-black garden, a different kind of chaos erupted. Donovan had sprinted through the patio doors just moments before, desperate to vanish into the tree line and make his way to a non-extradition country. He had always been a coward, perfectly willing to abandon his wife and his accomplices the second the illusion cracked. But the federal agents had already secured the perimeter. A loud shout rang out from the manicured lawn. "Stop running! Get on the ground!" Through the glass doors, I watched the shadows move. Donovan ignored the command, vaulting over a decorative stone planter in a blind panic. He did not make it far. Two heavily armored agents intercepted him mid-stride, hitting him with a brutal flying tackle that sent all three of them crashing into Catherine's prized rose bushes. Donovan screamed, thrashing wildly in the mud, but the agents were relentless. They pinned his arms behind his back, pressing his face deep into the wet soil. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs echoed clearly through the open patio doors. Inside the kitchen, William tried to summon the ghost of his former authority. He puffed out his chest, stepping in front of Catherine and Melanie as the lead agent strode into the room. "What is the meaning of this?" William bellowed, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "I demand you leave my property immediately. I know the mayor. I know the chief of police. You are trespassing on a private estate." The lead agent, a tall woman with steel-gray hair and an entirely unimpressed expression, stepped directly into William's personal space. She did not flinch. "William Caldwell," she said, her voice cutting through his bluster like a knife. "I am Agent Harris. We have a federal warrant for this property and for your immediate arrest. You are being charged with multiple counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit money laundering." William's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The threat of the mayor and his high society connections evaporated. He looked around the kitchen, his eyes darting frantically, searching for an exit that did not exist. Two agents stepped forward, grabbing him by the arms and spinning him around to face the marble island. William offered no resistance as they snapped the cuffs onto his wrists. The great patriarch of the Caldwell family was reduced to a trembling, silent shell. Catherine backed up against the luxury stove, her hands raised in surrender. "I did not do anything," she cried out, her voice shrill. "I am just a housewife. I do not know anything about his business." Agent Harris ignored her. She locked eyes with me across the room. I gave her a curt, respectful nod. I had sent the encrypted flash drive containing the complete forensic audit to her office early this morning. The offshore accounts, the dummy corporations, the forged signatures. It was all there, wrapped up in a neat, undeniable package. The raid was simply the final step in a trap I had set days ago. The patio doors swung wide open. The two agents hauled Donovan inside. He was a complete mess. His custom-tailored suit was torn and plastered with dark mud. His face was scraped and a loose branch from the rose bushes was tangled in his hair. They shoved him forward, forcing him to stand next to his ruined father-in-law. Melanie had been pressed against the far wall, watching her entire world burn to the ground. She stared at Donovan. She looked at the handcuffs binding his wrists. She looked at the federal agents swarming her childhood home. In an instant, Melanie's survival instincts kicked in. She dropped the facade of the grieving, betrayed wife. She lunged forward, pushing past a startled agent, and ran directly toward Agent Harris. Tears began to stream down her face in thick, dramatic rivulets. She pointed an accusing, manicured finger right at Donovan's chest. "I had nothing to do with it," Melanie sobbed, her voice ringing with desperate theatrical innocence. "It was all him. He lied to me. He told me the offshore accounts were just tax shelters. I am a victim here. You have to believe me. I am just his wife. He controlled all the finances." Donovan glared at her, spitting a mouthful of dirt onto the tile floor. "You signed the incorporation papers for the shell companies, you idiot," he snarled. "Your name is on every single offshore transfer." Melanie ignored him, clasping her hands together and looking pleadingly at Agent Harris. "Please, you have to help me. I am a victim of financial abuse." Agent Harris stared at Melanie for a long, silent moment. She looked at the expensive diamond necklace resting on Melanie's collarbone, paid for with stolen funds. She looked at the designer heels and the imported silk dress. There was absolutely no sympathy in the agent's eyes. Agent Harris reached down to her utility belt. She pulled out a second pair of heavy steel handcuffs. "Ma'am, wire fraud is a joint enterprise," Agent Harris said, her tone completely devoid of emotion. "Turn around." Melanie's wrists were snapped into the heavy steel handcuffs. The sharp metallic click echoed off the marble countertops, sealing her fate. She jerked away, screaming about her rights, her status, and her pristine reputation. "You cannot do this. I am a Caldwell. I am a victim." Agent Harris remained entirely unimpressed. She gripped Melanie by the bicep effortlessly, spinning her around, and marched her directly toward the shattered remnants of the front door. Melanie dug her expensive designer heels into the imported Persian rug, fighting like a cornered animal. She twisted her neck, her perfectly styled hair falling wildly across her face, and looked back at the kitchen. "Dad, Mom, do something. Call the retainer. Pay them off. Tell them who we are." William did not move. He did not reach for his phone. He stood absolutely paralyzed, watching the daughter he had worshipped, the daughter he had drained my college fund to pamper, being hauled away like a common criminal. Catherine remained on the floor, her fake heart attack entirely forgotten, sobbing hysterically into her hands. They had no high-powered lawyers left to call. They had no money left to pay anyone off. Donovan had made sure of that, and I had made sure their last remaining physical asset belonged exclusively to me. Melanie realized no help was coming. Her arrogant demands warped into shrill, terrified shrieks. The agents dragged her through the grand foyer and out into the freezing night air. Her screams mixed with Donovan's furious, muffled shouting outside. Car doors slammed heavily. Powerful engines roared to life. The violent flashing of red and blue lights swept across the kitchen walls one last time before accelerating down the long, winding driveway. Then there was nothing but silence. The quiet was absolute, broken only by the cold winter wind blowing through the splintered oak of the front door. The grand estate, once an impenetrable fortress of Caldwell elitism, felt completely dead. I looked around the room. The mahogany dining table was littered with spilled silver forks, crumpled linen napkins, and outdated property tax receipts. The heavy drawer William had ripped out lay shattered on the floor, surrounded by velvet boxes. William slowly turned his head to look at me. The arrogant, untouchable titan of industry was entirely gone. His skin was a sickly, translucent gray. His shoulders slumped, as if the physical gravity in the room had suddenly doubled. Beside him, Catherine pulled herself up from the tile floor. She did not bother smoothing her ruined silk blouse. Her face was streaked with thick black mascara, her eyes wide, bloodshot, and frantic. They were completely alone. Their massive wealth had evaporated. Their flawless social standing was permanently obliterated. Their beloved golden child was sitting in the back of a federal vehicle facing decades in federal prison for wire fraud. They had absolutely nothing left but the clothes on their backs and the daughter they had discarded like trash. Catherine took a trembling step toward me, then she fell to her knees. It was a staggering sight. Catherine Caldwell, a woman who cared infinitely more about her country club membership than her own flesh and blood, was crawling across the kitchen floor. She reached out, her shaking fingers hovering just inches from my leather shoes. "Kelsey," she sobbed, her voice a pathetic, broken wheeze. "Kelsey, please. You are my daughter, my firstborn. We made mistakes. We were wrong. We were just blinded by Donovan. We did not know what they were doing to the money. We did not understand the paperwork." William dropped to his knees right beside her. He did not look me in the eye. He stared blindly at the marble tile, his voice cracking with utter desperation. "We have nowhere to go, Kelsey. You cannot put us out on the street. We are old. We have no liquid assets. We have nothing. Please." I looked down at the two people who were supposed to protect me. They were groveling, but there was no genuine remorse in their eyes. There was only the primal selfish fear of losing their comfort. They were terrified of the void, the exact same void they forced me into 7 years ago. "We will change," Catherine begged, clasping her hands together in a gesture of frantic, desperate prayer. We will be the family you always wanted. We do not need the master suite. We do not need the grand dining room. Let us stay in the basement. There is a finished room down there. We will live in the basement. We will clean the house. We will tend the gardens. We will cook your meals. We will be quiet. Just please let us stay. Do not throw us out into the cold. We always knew you were the strong one, William added, finally looking up, trying to force a miserable, pleading smile onto his gray face. We pushed you because we knew you could handle the real world. Melanie was fragile. She needed us to protect her. But you were always brilliant. We love you, Kelsey. Deep down, we have always loved you. I listened to their words. I heard the desperate attempt to rewrite history, the pathetic scramble to turn decades of targeted emotional abuse into some twisted form of tough love. They were perfectly willing to become my domestic servants, perfectly willing to abandon Melanie to federal prison as long as they got to keep a roof over their heads. They would say anything to survive. Too. I did not yell. I did not cry. I stepped away from them, leaving them kneeling side by side on the cold floor. I walked slowly out of the kitchen and into the adjoining formal living room, my footsteps echoing in the quiet house. I approached the massive stone fireplace. Resting directly in the center of the mantel was a beautiful, intricate antique brass clock. I reached out and picked it up. The brass was heavy and cold in my hands. The rhythmic ticking of the internal gears was steady, precise, and relentless. I turned around to face my parents. They had crawled to the doorway, watching me with wide, desperate eyes, waiting for me to grant them absolution. Remember when you sold my grandmother's heirloom clock to pay for Melanie's sorority dues? I asked, my voice ringing with absolute icy clarity. Catherine flinched as if physically struck. William stared at the clock, the last drop of color draining from his face. I bought it back at an auction last year. Everything you sold of mine I bought back. But I'm not buying back your love. The heavy silence following my words was thick enough to choke on. The antique brass clock ticked rhythmically in my hands, a steady mechanical heartbeat in a room completely devoid of life. I stepped forward and carefully placed the heirloom back onto the center of the stone mantel. It belonged there. They did not. Catherine's pathetic whimpering died in her throat. She looked up at me, her tear-streaked face twisting in confusion, as if her brain simply could not process the concept of a transaction where her tears were not accepted as currency. William, however, processed it perfectly. I watched the exact second the patriarch of the Caldwell family realized his groveling had failed. The desperate pleading facade vanished, burning away under a rapid, rising tide of toxic rage. The sickly gray color of his skin was instantly replaced by a violent, mottled crimson. He pushed himself off the cold tile floor, brushing the dust from the knees of his tailored trousers. He straightened his spine, rolling his broad shoulders backward as he summoned the imposing tyrannical presence that had terrorized boardrooms and dining rooms for 3 decades. He stepped toward me, his fists clenching at his sides. He tried to tower over me, utilizing the exact same physical intimidation tactics he had relied on since I was a child. I remembered being 16 years old, backed against the heavy mahogany bookshelves of his private study, my heart hammering against my ribs as he used his massive frame to box me in. He had screamed at me until his voice went hoarse entirely because I had dared to apply for a paid summer internship instead of attending the country club etiquette seminars he demanded. Back then, his sheer physical presence had been enough to force my submission. Tonight, standing in the ruins of his empire, his posturing was absolutely comical. I did not shrink. I did not step back. I met his furious, bloodshot eyes with a gaze carved from solid ice. "You ungrateful, vindictive little wretch!" William hissed, his voice dropping into a guttural, threatening octave. "You think because you hold a piece of paper, you can dismiss me from my own home. I built this legacy. I put the roof over your head. You owe me your entire miserable existence. I am your father, and you will show me the respect this family demands." I reached inside the inner breast pocket of my tailored blazer. My fingers brushed against the crisp, heavy parchment I had prepared earlier that afternoon. I withdrew the documents and held them out toward him. The bold black text of the legal header was unmistakable. "You do not have a legacy." "William," I stated, my tone perfectly even, "you have a mountain of debt, a shell company fraud scandal, and a squatter's claim to a property you no longer own. The 48-hour grace period I offered you was a courtesy. That courtesy has officially expired. Sign the acknowledgement of eviction." William stared at those documents. The muscles in his jaw locked so tightly I could hear his teeth grinding together. For a moment, I thought his sheer pride might trigger a genuine medical emergency. Instead, he lashed out. He swung his heavy arm, slapping the papers out of my hand with a vicious backhanded strike. The documents scattered across the imported tile, sliding to a halt near Catherine's knees. "You will have to drag me out of here," William roared, the veins bulging prominently along his neck. "I am not signing your eviction notice. I will not surrender my home to a bitter, jealous accountant. This is my property." I let his temper tantrum echo off the high ceilings. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to match his hysteria. I simply raised my left hand and gave a sharp, deliberate snap of my fingers. The response was instantaneous. Heavy synchronized footsteps echoed down the main hallway, moving with tactical precision. The grand arched doorway of the dining room was immediately filled by the arrival of my private security detail. Marcus and Reynolds were both towering, broad-shouldered veterans of private military contracting, wearing immaculate black suits and clear earpieces. They moved into the room with absolute unyielding authority, flanking the entrance and cutting off any possible avenue of retreat. They did not speak. They did not need to. Their sheer, overwhelming presence sucked the remaining oxygen out of the room. William stumbled backward, his bravado instantly collapsing. He looked at the two massive guards blocking the doorway, then looked back at me, sheer panic reigniting in his eyes. He had spent his entire life using highly paid corporate lawyers and subtle social threats to bully people into submission. He was entirely unequipped to handle a raw physical display of power. He finally understood that I was not playing a strategic corporate game. This was a physical takeover. "Pick up the papers, William," I commanded, my voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper. "Sign them, or Marcus and Reynolds will physically lift you off this floor, carry you out the front door, and deposit you on the curb in front of every single one of your wealthy, gossiping neighbors." The federal agents are still processing Melanie's arrest in the driveway. I am sure the local news crews monitoring the police scanners would love to film the great William Caldwell being physically ejected from his foreclosed estate. Catherine let out a muffled, horrified shriek. She scrambled backward on the floor, grabbing the scattered documents with trembling hands. She shoved them upward toward her husband, her face a mask of absolute terror. "William, please!" Catherine sobbed, completely broken by the threat of public humiliation. "Do not let them throw us on the street. Sign it, just sign it." William stared at the papers trembling in his wife's hands. He looked at Marcus, who took one slow, deliberate step forward, his heavy dress shoes cracking against the tile. William's shoulders sagged. The final remnants of his patriarchal dominance shattered into a million irreparable pieces. He snatched the papers from Catherine, grabbing a pen from his breast pocket. He pressed the documents against the marble island, his hands shaking so violently he could barely manage his signature. He scrawled his name across the bottom line. It was a messy, frantic scribble of defeat. He shoved the papers back across the marble toward me. I picked up the eviction notice, verifying the signature with a brief glance, and folded the document back into my blazer. "Pack your bags," I said. "You have 30 minutes before the guards escort you off the premises." William backed away from the marble island, his chest heaving with ragged, uneven breaths. He looked around the dining room, his eyes darting wildly as the absolute finality of his ruin sank in. He had lost his money. He had lost his house. He had lost his golden child. He was cornered, stripped bare, and completely out of options. But a narcissist never truly surrenders. When backed into a corner, they simply search for a new weapon. William's eyes snapped back to me. The terror faded, replaced by a desperate, vindictive madness. He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger directly at my face. "I will go to the media," William yelled, his voice cracking with hysterical, venomous spite. I will tell every news outlet in this city how you destroyed your own family. Your business will be ruined. William's threat hung in the freezing air, vibrating with a desperate, venomous spite. He stood with his chest heaved out, his fists clenched, waiting for the familiar flash of panic to cross my face. He expected me to beg. He expected me to negotiate. He firmly believed that the threat of public scandal was the ultimate weapon against a business owner. I looked at him for a long, silent moment. Then I laughed. It was a quiet, melodic sound, completely devoid of fear or anxiety. The laugh echoed sharply off the high, vaulted ceilings of the formal dining room, slicing through William's posturing like a scalpel. He froze, his red face twitching in profound confusion. I turned my back on him and walked over to the shattered remains of the mahogany dining table. My leather portfolio rested untouched amidst the debris. I unzipped the main compartment and pulled out a sleek silver tablet. The screen glowed brightly, illuminating my face in the dim light. I tapped the glass once, refreshing the browser page, and then turned around. I walked back to William, stopping just inches from his trembling fists. I held the tablet up, positioning the glowing screen directly in his line of sight. "Read it." I commanded, my tone completely conversational. William squinted, his anger momentarily overridden by a sudden creeping sense of dread. He stared at the screen. The bold, unmistakable masthead of the publication dominated the top of the web page. It was Forbes magazine. Directly beneath the prestigious logo, a massive headline was printed in stark, unforgiving black text. Apex Forensics CEO uncovers massive local real estate fraud. Local. William's eyes darted frantically across the screen, reading the subheading out loud in a breathless, ragged whisper. How a meticulous financial audit brought down a multi-million-dollar shell company and exposed the negligent patriarch who funded it. His mouth dropped open. The air seemed to have been permanently stolen from his lungs. He read his own name printed in the very first paragraph, explicitly detailing his catastrophic failure to conduct even a basic background check on Donovan. The article outlined the offshore accounts, the forged signatures, and the absolute staggering incompetence of Caldwell Investments. "You cannot go to the media, Dad," I said, my voice echoing with icy absolute authority. "I already did. I control the narrative. The whole world knows Donovan is a fraud, and you are his enablers. You have zero leverage, zero money, and zero public sympathy." Catherine let out a whimpering, high-pitched gasp. She slapped her hands over her mouth, her eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated horror. For Catherine Caldwell, poverty was a nightmare, but public humiliation was a fate worse than death. "They are reading it!" Catherine choked out, her voice trembling so violently she could barely form the words. "The country club, the charity board, everyone we know. They are all reading this right now." I lowered the tablet, keeping my eyes locked onto my mother's tear-streaked face. "Yes, Catherine, they are," I confirmed, striking the final fatal blow to her social standing. "I gave the investigative journalist the encrypted flash drive 3 days ago. We timed the publication to drop exactly 5 minutes after the federal agents breached your front door. I retained the best crisis management public relations firm in the city." Right now, Apex Forensics is being hailed as an industry savior, a brilliant firm that rooted out systemic corruption. And Caldwell Investments is currently trending on social media as the punchline to a very expensive, very pathetic joke. William stumbled backward, colliding heavily with the edge of the marble island. He gripped the stone countertop, his knuckles turning white as he desperately tried to keep himself upright. "My friends," William stammered, his eyes darting wildly around the room as if searching for a lifeline. "My associates, they will know this is a hit piece. They will stand by me. I have made them millions over the years." I shook my head, feeling a cold, clinical satisfaction wash over me. Wealth protects wealth, William. The second your associates read that article, the second they realize you are entirely radioactive and completely bankrupt, they will cut your phone lines. Your country club membership will be revoked by morning. Your dinner invitations are canceled permanently. You are a massive, glaring liability, and no one in your pristine social circle will risk catching the stench of your failure. Catherine collapsed against William, burying her face in his shoulders, sobbing with a deep, guttural despair. Her entire identity, her entire worth as a human being was tied directly to the designer labels she wore and the exclusive tables she commanded. In a single night, she had been reduced to an absolute nobody. Marcus, the massive security contractor flanking the arched doorway, stepped forward. His heavy tactical boots cracked loudly against the imported tile. He raised his wrist, tapping the glowing face of his heavy watch. 25 minutes, Marcus stated, his deep, rumbling baritone demanding absolute obedience. I nodded to the guard, then turned my attention back to the broken couple clinging to each other by the kitchen island. You heard the man, I said, gesturing toward the grand staircase in the foyer. You have 25 minutes to vacate my property. You are permitted one standard-sized suitcase each. You may pack essential clothing and basic toiletries. William's head snapped up, his eyes flashing with a sudden desperate panic. Our things. The art. The jewelry. You cannot confiscate our personal property. That is theft. You use stolen funds to maintain this estate. I replied, my voice hard and unyielding. The federal agents have already tagged the high-value assets for seizure to pay back the creditors you defrauded. If you attempt to pack a single piece of jewelry, a single watch, or any electronics purchased with company funds, Marcus and Reynolds will physically restrain you and hand you directly over to Agent Harris for obstruction of justice. Catherine looked at me as if I were an alien creature. She did not recognize the woman standing in front of her. The quiet, obedient daughter they had bullied and discarded was entirely gone, replaced by a strategic predator who had effortlessly dismantled their entire reality. Where are we supposed to go? Catherine whispered, her tears ruining the expensive silk of William's shirt. We have no cash. The accounts are frozen. We do not have a car. Please, Kelsey, just a hotel room, just for tonight. You have 2 healthy legs, Catherine, I stated, feeling absolutely zero pity for the woman who had happily watched me get thrown onto the street with nothing but a garbage bag of clothes. I suggest you start walking. William opened his mouth to argue, to hurl another useless threat, but Reynolds took a slow, deliberate step into the room, resting his hand casually on his utility belt. The physical threat was undeniable. William swallowed his pride. He grabbed Catherine by the arm, hauling her away from the marble island, and dragged her toward the grand staircase. Marcus and Reynolds fell into step right behind them, their massive frames casting long dark shadows across the foyer. I stood alone in the ruins of the Caldwell estate, listening to the heavy footsteps echoing on the hardwood stairs. The silence of the house was no longer suffocating. It was peaceful. I walked over to the shattered oak front door and looked out into the freezing night. The flashing blue and red lights were entirely gone, leaving the pristine manicured driveway bathed in cold, pale moonlight. I left them on the floor. I turned my back on their soft, pathetic weeping and walked out of the living room, heading toward the grand staircase in the foyer. I climbed the hardwood steps, my heels clicking loudly in the quiet house, and walked down the long hallway. I passed Melanie's bedroom, an obnoxious shrine of pink silk and pageant trophies, and pushed open the door at the very end of the hall. My old bedroom was exactly as I had left it 7 years ago. It was sterile, ignored, and entirely devoid of warmth. I did not linger on the ghosts of my past. I walked directly to the back of the walk-in closet, reaching up to the highest shelf. I pulled down a small battered cardboard box. It was the only thing in this massive estate that truly belonged to me. Inside were my real memories. A faded drawing I had done when I was 8 years old, the only piece of art my grandmother had ever praised before she passed away. A cheap plastic medal from a regional math decathlon I had won in high school, an event my parents had skipped to attend Melanie's cheerleading practice. A worn leather-bound journal filled with the meticulously handwritten business plans and financial projections I had dreamed up while sitting alone in this very room. These items were the physical evidence of my solitary resilience. They were the foundation of the empire I had built entirely on my own. I tucked the box under my arm and walked back out into the hallway. I descended the grand staircase one last time. From the foyer, I could see into the formal living room. William and Catherine had not moved. They were still sitting on the floor clinging to each other, two broken strangers stranded in a house they no longer owned. I did not say goodbye. They had ceased to be my family a long time ago. I walked out the splintered front door and stepped out into the cool, freezing night air. The violent flashing lights of the federal vehicles were long gone, leaving the pristine manicured driveway bathed in pale moonlight. I paused on the edge of the stone porch. Resting on the pavement, completely ignored by the federal agents and the private security contractors, was the crumpled $100 bill Donovan had thrown at my feet hours earlier, the ultimate symbol of his pathetic, fraudulent arrogance. I did not pick it up. I did not kick it away. I simply stepped cleanly over it, leaving it to rot on the driveway of a foreclosed estate. My private driver was waiting at the bottom of the steps, standing at attention beside my sleek black SUV. He opened the heavy armored door for me with a respectful nod. I slid into the warm, plush leather seat and placed my box of memories securely beside me. I looked out the tinted window at the grand fortress of Caldwell elitism one last time. The house was entirely dark, a dead monument to a destroyed legacy. I felt absolutely nothing but a profound, unshakable peace. True justice is achieved not through screaming, not through groveling, and certainly not through tears. True justice is achieved through untouchable, brilliant success. I tapped the glass divider separating the front cabin. "Take me home," I instructed. The powerful engine purred to life and the SUV smoothly accelerated down the long, winding driveway, carrying me away to my real life. The most profound lesson from Kelsey's journey is that true vindication doesn't require matching the toxicity of those who wronged you. When faced with deep familial betrayal, the human instinct is often to seek loud, chaotic revenge. However, Kelsey demonstrates that the ultimate countermeasure to manipulation is undeniable success and impenetrable boundaries. By reclaiming her own narrative and focusing entirely on building her independent empire, she rendered her abusers completely powerless. Blood does not guarantee loyalty, and walking away from a toxic environment is the true foundation of genuine freedom. Have you ever had to establish firm boundaries to protect your peace? Share your story and comment below.